Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this VLEVA webinar in the EU Green Week. This year, the European Green Week is entirely devoted to the Zero Pollution Action Plan. As this action plan contains many aspects and we only have an hour this morning, we decided to focus on the water aspects within the action plan for this webinar today. Questions can be asked through the control panel, and then I would now like to give the floor to our first speaker, Mr. Hans Zielstra from the European Commission.
Okay, good morning. Sorry, I'm just still trying to work out how to present. I think you still see my full screen, which is not the idea. This is probably a bit better, but still not ideal.
Yes, you have to press display settings and then choose the first option.
Sorry, which setting?
Display settings.
Yeah, okay, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is better, right?
Yes, we can see everything now.
Good, very good. Okay, right. So thank you very much for having me in the meeting. Really a pleasure to be able to present to you the Zero Pollution Action Plan that was adopted very recently. And indeed, the theme of the Green Week is exactly on this Zero Pollution Action Plan. 2 words about myself. I work for the European Commission, the Director General for Environment, and within that there's a unit that is responsible for water policy, and I'm a deputy head of that unit. And one of the contributors, one of many contributors to the Zero Pollution Action Plan for air, water, and soil. So I will show you 9 slides in total, including this one. So I'm going to keep it relatively brief in view of the fact that we have so limited time, but I still would like to present to you the main features of the Zero Pollution Action Plan. First of all, I think it's important to keep in mind that it comes within the context of the European Green Deal, so which was adopted by the end of 2019 and is really meant to be the new European growth strategy, certainly for the duration of this Commission and hopefully well into the future. Most things that have been announced at the adoption of the European Green Deal have all in the meantime been elaborated and adopted. So I'm talking about the climate ambitions for the EU, although by the middle of July there will be another package, very substantial package called Fit for 55, with which really makes the idea of moving to 55% reduction by 2030 more concrete. So there's the climate element, there's climate adaptation, also the climate adaptation strategy that has been adopted, the circular economy action plan, a second version of that has been adopted. Energy efficiency, renewable energy was part of the package. Then, of course, the much discussed financing of the European Green Deal. So apart from a substantial part of the regular EU budget, there's also the Resilience and Recovery Plan that will also be in part focused on environmental objectives. And let's see what the different member states come up with as plans. Farm to fork, so the sustainable, moving to a more sustainable agricultural production. The biodiversity strategy was part of this, and then finally this zero pollution ambition. And this zero pollution ambition consists of two legs. One is, I think, a fundamental revamping of the chemicals policy that we have at the moment, the chemicals legislation, and everything that comes with it. And then this zero pollution action plan that we have recently adopted. So this is the second leg of this zero pollution ambition, which in itself is part then of the European Green Deal. So zero pollution sounds awfully ambitious, and I think it is. But what we've said in the zero pollution action plan is that this is to be understood as reducing pollution by 2050 to a level or to levels that are no longer considered harmful for human health, for natural ecosystems, and that function within the boundaries of the planet. So it's not about the absolute zero, which evidently is impossible, but it's bringing it down to levels that are sustainable for the planet, and that no longer pose risks to our own health, human health, and to the environment. Then it set a number of quantitative targets, which are all functioning within the SDGs, so we're not moving away from that. But it set a number of quantitative targets, and just to be clear and to be transparent, many of these were already set out by other strategies before the Zero Pollution Action Plan. For instance, this point of the reduction of 50% of nutrient losses and pesticides and the use of antimicrobials was already part of the farm to fork strategy. But that doesn't make it any less relevant, of course. So those are a number of quantitative strategies that we have set out. Right in the middle is something that I think is absolutely crucial in all of this, which is that what we evidently want to, what should really be the core of our work collectively, is to achieve the objectives set in EU laws. And if you look at my area, the area of water policy, we have a very important objective set there, which is the non-deterioration of all European water bodies, and achieving of good status for European water bodies. And this already in theory, already by 2015, and if exemptions are applied by 2027. So that is a very steep objective that's been set, and it's crucial that will be achieved also from a zero pollution perspective. And achieving objectives in EU laws is not a static thing, of course. There are continuously, and I will get to that in a minute. There's a continuous updating of this legislation ongoing, of course. Something that we want to really emphasize as part of the zero pollution ambition is that it has to follow a certain hierarchy. Our actions need to follow a certain hierarchy. We start with, as much as possible, prevent pollution from occurring at all. The next step, and less preferred evidently, is the minimization and the control. So say the minimization at the level of agriculture, or at the level of industrial installations or wastewater treatment. And the final step, and least preferred evidently, but sometimes necessary, is the elimination of pollution and the remediation. And as I said, it's the least preferred step, but it is obviously still necessary in a number of cases that we continue efforts. But just to show you what is the hierarchy of action that I think we have to take when it comes to addressing pollution. This Zero Pollution Action Plan, if you look at it more closely, you will see that it has, on the one hand, a set of so-called flagships, and on the other hand, a number of individual actions that are usually more focused on individual sectors. So these flagships are integrated initiatives, and there are 9 of them. I will not go through all of them, but for instance, the one in the middle, enforcing zero pollution together, is a good example of the way we would like to do it, namely, or the way many of these flagships are structured. What we want to do there is that we bring together the enforcement authorities across a number of sectors together to make sure that one reduces pollution in an integrated manner. So those responsible for water, for soil, for air, bring them together and try to devise ways in which to reduce pollution in an integrated manner rather than focusing on each of the segments individually. Number 6 is about, well, there's a number of funds at the moment available to promote examples of zero pollution in buildings. We want to fund that type of work, and we want to show examples of how this could be realized and replicated in other places. So these flagships are essentially of that structure. So really integrating across a number of pollution areas. Then to the actions finally, or not, or almost finally. So for the next couple of years, we have a large number of actions set out here. And now we really land more in the traditional sectorial approach, if you like. And the subtitle of this Zero Pollution Action Plan is for air, water, and soil. So you will see the focus very much on those 3 areas. Revision of the Air Quality Directive is one of them, with aligning ourselves more to the WHO standards in this area. The revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is certainly going to be a big project and a very meaningful project, I think, on the ground for water pollution. The revision of the list of water pollutants in surface water and groundwater is another one. So we are actually already busy preparing those sorts of revision processes. Industrial Emissions Directive is another one where we are looking, for instance, to the possibility of expanding this directive into other areas than the ones that are currently covered by the directive. The emission limit values for motor vehicles, we sometimes forget with all our interest in electric vehicles that there's still also a very large majority of cars and trucks are, of course, using internal combustion. So it's highly relevant that we also continue to work on the limit values for motor vehicles. So you see there's really a large number of actions that we have to undertake. Yeah, I think when it comes to water, maybe just mention the other 2 that are relevant, since the theme of the day is water. We plan a revision of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive in 2023, and a review of the Bathing Water Directive also in that year. And then some others are, of course, relevant for water, like the idea to prepare an integrated nutrient management plan. And there's some others as well, but perhaps I leave it at that. By the way, the full presentation is a bit longer. I think it has 14 or 15 slides, and I would propose that I simply make that available to everyone in the meeting, but not go through it all now. So 2 final points, 2 final slides also. We want to create a so-called zero pollution stakeholder platform. So we bring together all the relevant stakeholders for zero pollution regularly together, which would have an added value over and above the meetings that we at the moment have sector by sector. And then finally, a zero pollution monitoring and outlook. And this really builds on what I think is the very good experience that we have in the air quality area, where we not only do the traditional monitoring and reporting, but where we also are trying to work out how the developments ahead of us. So we're trying to model likely developments under certain scenarios, so that we can adapt policies not after the fact has been after the facts have materialized, but already at an earlier stage. So that we want to do, that we are doing in the air quality area at the moment, and we would like to do that also in other areas and more broadly for this concept of zero pollution. So we will give our colleagues in the Joint Research Center of the Commission an important role in all of that, to create that sort of outlooks. Of course, this cannot happen from today to tomorrow, but it will gradually develop over the years. We start next year with water, but focusing mostly on nitrates and on urban wastewater, and then we will gradually expand that to include other areas. So a lot more detail on this slide that you can have a look at if you want. Yeah. Okay. I think this was what I wanted to present to you. As I said, the full set of slides is available, so very happy to share that with you and to discuss anything that you would like to discuss on what I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silsa, for a very interesting presentation. If there are any questions, they can be asked through the control panel. For now, I see no questions, so I guess we can go on to the next speaker and we can pick up on questions if they will be asked later. Then I would now like to give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Dirk Halle from Vlakwa.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. We can see the presentation right now. Yes, now we can see the presentation on full screen. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. What I would like to present in the coming 15 minutes is the approach of system thinking and system analysis as being very important to tackle the zero pollution strategy, because we don't have the time and the money to solve a problem several times in a course. So to begin, if we look to water, we need water for different functions. We need it as a source of life, for reproduction, for irrigating our crops, etc. We need it for experience, for recreation. We use it as a means of transport and for waterborne transport. We use it as a raw material, think of beverages, and also as an energy carrier, think of cooling. And so in the past millennia, years, we've adopted the water system to meet all these demands. But what we see in the last years is that there is increased tension between what we expect the water system to deliver to us and what it actually can deliver. And this results in increased tension and in phenomena like water quality problems, but also problems with scarcity and flooding. And so these are the outcomes of our system. And in this perspective, the quote of William Edwards Deming is rather relevant, who says that your system is perfectly designed to give the results you're getting. So the fact that we are confronted with these problems of water quality issues lies back into the way that we've organized the system. And if we want to have another outcome of our system, we have to firstly understand very well the system and how it works. And that's why the analogy was taken from the iceberg, because that's how often system thinking is represented, and where that you often focus on the events. But if you only focus on the events, the things that you really can see, which is the tip of the iceberg, you only can take reactive measures. And there's also what Mr. Steelstra explained previously in the presentation of the hierarchy, is that's actually, if you think about eliminating or remediation, that's actually it has not big leverage to really achieve your goals. But that's the thing that you can do if you're confronted with a dirty lake or river, then you're going to clean it. But it becomes more interesting if you go under the water level and that you recognize patterns, that you see that this pollution is coming back every once in a while. And then you're going to look to the source, you're going to see where this pollution is coming from. You're going to deviate the source to, for example, infrastructure that can purify it. You're going to put emission standards. But if you're going to take away these emission standards, and for example, there's a new government and it's going to say that it's not necessary, then I don't think that the system is working this way today, that we will not see an increase of pollution. And then we go still deeper. And then you're going to look to the system structure, which means that you're going to realize that these patterns, that they are all related to each other, that you go and see that there are cause-effect relations between these different patterns, and that you see, for example, that there is a relation between increased food amount, soil quality, diffuse emission, etc. And then you can think, how can we change this cause-effect relation? And for example, how can you ensure that increased food amount results in a better soil quality? And finally, and this is the level where you have the highest leverage, but it's very difficult to change. But it's already very important to understand which are the mental models, the opinions, the beliefs that steer the water system. But because it's not often thermodynamics of the laws of Newton that determine how we've organized the water system. It's because of the things how we wanted the water system to function. And then it's very important to understand these mental models that steer the water system. And for example, in the explanation of the example of soil management, it's the belief or the opinion that the farmer is only there to produce food, while he has a very good knowledge of the soil and can manage it in a very good way to meet our societal demands and our climate challenges. So maybe in the future, a farmer should not only be a food producer. And so this approach of system thinking, to really understand firstly how the water system works and to see where there are cracks in the design, was a process that we could set up together with some large player within the water sector in Flanders, which gave the room to different front runners, experts from different disciplines, going from financial experts, sociologists, historians, technologists, CEOs, etc., to really think what are the mental models that steer the system and what could be new leading ideas if we want to have another outcome of our water system. And to give you an example of how such analysis looks like and how you're going to see, how you're going to visualize the relation between different patterns in your system, I have here a figure of the drought. What's the impact of drought on your system, which was actually a nice stress, it was a stress test to see, actually to identify where the cracks, the design faults are today in our system, also linked to the water quality issues. And if you see a red line between two variables, this means that these two variables are moving in the opposite direction. If the drought increases, then we see that the flow rate in your rivers decreases. And if you see a green line, this means that the two variables are moving in the same direction. If the flow rate decreases, then we see that the access to water also decreases, and there's the amount of water that is available in the quality that we want for the different functions of water. And then you see a lot of evolutions there. If the access to water decreases, then you see, and this is more the part of industry side, that you see that a lot of companies are investing in water reuse, which is actually very favorable, because the more they reuse water, the more water is available for other players. But the counterpart is that with the current technology, we see that with more water use, we get concentrated wastewaters, because you push the water through a membrane, you get clean water one side, but you get concentrated water, wastewater at the other side, which you have to discharge. And this has an impact on the ecosystem. For example, also on its functions. Think of the self-cleaning properties of a river. And then the government has to intervene. It's going to pose limits on the amount of pollutants can be discharged. And this puts actually then a limit on the amount of water that can be reused. And this is also worsened with the decrease of flow rate. Think of harbors. If you have a low flow rate coming from upstream, then you get more salt intrusion. And if you have a higher salt concentration in your canals, this has a negative impact on the performance of your water use installation. So actually at the moment that you want that the water treatment installations are working the most performance, and in periods of drought, they work the least performance. And very much linked to the issue of pollution, if your flow rate decreases, then your dilution also increases, and then the impact on your ecosystem will be much quicker visible. Then we come to the energy system, where you see when the flow rate decreases that your water will heat up much quickly. So this means that your temperature in your river will rise, and the warmer your water is, the more cooling water you need for the same cooling, for cooling your chemical processes, for energy companies, food companies, etc. A part of this water is discharged back, but also a part evaporates, which has an impact on the flow rate. But more importantly is this thermal pollution that you get. And then again, the government has to intervene and impose limitations on the amount of water that can be used for cooling. And then you can ask companies what it means when you can't cool your processes anymore. And then it's not so much the price of water that drives them, but the notion that the value of water is very important to keep their processes running. Then we have the whole food system, the water as a source of life, where you have a lot of variables playing, but where you have an important one is, for example, erosion, where we saw in the last period in May, we saw a lot of water flowing. We saw that actually rivers were brown because there's a lot of erosion and organic material also leaving the arable land. Organic material, which is kind of the glue between the soil particles, then also diminishes, and this increases again erosion. So you have there a self-reinforcing loop, which also not only makes that soil is going away, but also nutrients, also pesticides, etc. And this, of course, has also an impact on the infiltration capacity, that less water can infiltrate. Also, the whole urbanization story has an impact on the infiltration capacity, and as this infiltration capacity drops and we can't refill our groundwater layers, this again has an impact on the amount of water that is available. And to mention a last system, which is also a focus on the Green Deal, is transport over water. So we want to invest in more shipping and bigger ships. So if the amount of ships increases, which is also has a risk, but if the amount of ships increases, this means that we have more lock passages, which means that every time a ship passes lock, this is the amount of water from the upstream that goes to the downstream back to the sea. So this has an impact on the access to water. And if you are going to have bigger ships, this means also that you have to reserve a much higher volume in your canal to move your ship from point A to point B, which means that there's less amount of water available for other users. So by this simplified diagram, you see how strong these interconnections are within these different systems, that you have to do with a very, not a complex problem, but with a wicked problem. It's not always very clear if you're going to take an intervention in one part of the system, how it will trickle through to the whole. And with this drought, we really saw that there are some design issues that should be solved. And there I would like to quote Leonard Cohen, who says, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So it's not. So there's also an optimistic side on this story, is by identifying these cracks, that there are also opportunities that we can see and as a basis to solve some challenging issues. And then I come to one of the point of the mental models, the opinions, the beliefs. It's really important to understand what are the beliefs and opinions that steer the system. And for example, in the process we identified many, but I will just highlight a few which are somehow also linked with the problem of the zero pollution ambitions. Is if you see this figure here, you clearly see that the government tries to keep the system in balance. In the arena, the name of popcorn policy was mentioned, where you try to hold the lid down to keep the popcorn all inside, while actually you could turn down the gas, and you could make the flame smaller, and the flame actually represents here growth, economic growth. This is not only valuable for this discussion here, but in many issues. And if you then talk about maybe we should think in another way of growth, and maybe we shouldn't have these ambitions of high economic growth and say we have to grow every year 2%, then there is like a short circuit in many brains of us that, and with the phrase to shrink is to crack. But we see there also already positive evolutions. I think also in the presentation of Mr. Silstra, also the relation was made to the SDGs. Where you also have new economic models, for example, the donut economy, which looks on where we have to, how we have to, new economic models that respect the boundaries of our planet and respect humankind. And what's actually also interesting for this donut economy is that water is the only element that's in the inner boundary as in the outer boundary of the donut economy. But we see, what I want to come to the point is that you also see in the higher education that now courses are being given where the basis of economics is not the classical economic theories, but are new economic theories that are in line with the SDGs, with the donut economy, and where they not talk about externalities and side effects, which are actually the cause why we have the problems today, but only talk about effects and things that we should take into account when developing new business models. Another mental model, which is especially the case in Western Europe, is that we also in our education we have we focus very much on specialization, and this is very valuable if you want to solve complex problems, to split the problem in little parts. And by this we are very good in optimizing subsystems. But this in a situation as today, where you're not confronted with complex systems, you are confronted with more wicked problems. It's very important to keep an eye on the whole system. And the issue is that when only focusing on the subsystem, we have seen that also in the past objectives were developed based on these subsystems, and also innovation then was also driven on these subsystems. And in the field of water, if we take in, we was talking about the revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. Emissions are imposed at the level of the urban wastewater treatment plant. And by this approach, if you have heavy rainfall, where we will be confronted in the coming years, then the decision is being made to activate overflows, because the wastewater treatment plant can't handle all this water and meet the limits that are imposed. And going from a more holistic approach would mean that we go from an emission approach to an emission approach, and that you look to that the basis of steering all the subsystems is based on the water quality in your river. So then the situation would not be, in this case, for example, that you would activate an overflow, but that you would steer the water to the wastewater treatment plant, even though that you can't treat all the water, but it would have a less negative impact on the whole water system. Also, what was mentioned and was that the lowest leverage is on end-of-pipe measures. What we see very often, especially in the field of pollution, that we're going to take end-of-pipe measures to remediate, while we actually see that there is a higher leverage more upstream. And it's also very valuable to see that also in companies are not only looking at the level of the utilities, but really also looking at the core business, core processes to see how they can adopt their processes to have a better grip on the substances that come into their wastewater. But also in the field of pharmaceuticals, and we're also working on a Green Deal pharmaceuticals in Flanders, where you also see that certain insurance companies also want to move away from the curative approach to more preventive approach. And today in Belgium, 2% of the budget goes to preventive care, and this is something that we could turn over, and we see that also in other countries, in China, in Austria, also in Obamacare. We couldn't think that also in the United States, but there they want to shift also this mindset and pay doctors to keep patients healthy rather than just treating the illness. Another mental model is also that we use that infrastructure is used as a framework for our thinking. And we have a lot of big infrastructures which has cost a lot of money, which are not yet depreciated, and these fix our thinking, because if we would should send less polluted water to these wastewater treatment plants, they would work less performant. If we would take less drinking water from the drinking water nets, we would have more standstill in these drinking water nets and have problems with quality issues. And so the innovative approaches that we propose should always fit within these existing infrastructures. And there an exercise is set up to see what would happen if we could think further than the depreciation of all these infrastructures. The story of the mental model of the farm is a food producer I explained in the previous slide. And then as the last one, we have the issue of centralization and hierarchies, which were put forward to become more efficient, and which was also a very valuable approach, because if you have to allocate water between 10 farmers, you can manage it. You can also manage the communication lines. But if you go into a situation where you have to allocate water to 10,000, 100,000, 1 million people, then the amount of communication lines also increases dramatically, logarithmically, and this becomes not manageable, and then you have to impose a hierarchy to do so. But with doing so, you also lose a lot of context-sensitive knowledge. You also lose local knowledge. And now we also see that we again have to, we again want to take the step to really tap into this local knowledge. But this also means that we have to think what this means to giving back power to at the local level, and giving back means to at the local level, and also how we're going to build up back knowledge within this community. And there also the relation, it's also very inspirational to look to other platforms, because with digitalization, this problem of managing the different communication lines becomes again possible, where we can see how we can shorten the distance again between managers and the citizens. And if you can shorten the distance, you can also have other means to steer behavior other than working with prices. And we also see with, for example, Netflix platforms that work on the basis of a hybrid platform, how central and decentral aspects can work together, and that the quality is guaranteed. And for the energy system, what I also think is very valuable of such a system approach is that there's a case of students of the KU Leuven that proposed that how we can recover water from our wastewater, from our water streams, is if you propose a project that you can not only see what are the direct impacts, but also how an initiative trickles through the whole system, and see where other values or maybe side effects or problems could arise. And this is what I come back to the introduction of my presentation, is that this also helps to really identify the right solutions, and that we don't shift a problem from one sector to one subsystem, from one subsystem to another. So to conclude, all the results, which I only presented only a very brief amount of, we have put available also in English on the website, which you can find here. And we also use different form languages like poetry, cartoons, text, graphs, so that there is for everybody, there's an entry to explore the insights of this work, which is a continuous effort. So also insights and feedback from your part is more than welcome. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and don't hesitate to contact for thinking further on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for your very interesting presentation. I have some questions for our previous speaker, Mr. Hans Zielstra from the European Commission. Do you have more information on the nutrient management plans? You mentioned ammonia, but I suppose this will include other pollutants as well.
Do you want me to answer now?
Yes, if it's possible.
Yeah, well, the nutrient management plan is something that should be, if I remember correctly, it should be put forward next year. I'm not entirely sure, but it's something I need to look up a bit. I'm not entirely familiar with the details of that, to be honest.
Okay.
And it's, I mean, it's about nutrients. So I'm not sure whether ammonia is the primary focus of the nutrient management plan. But yeah, I assume that inevitably it will include ammonia as well. But I can get back to you on that one with details.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for you. Where do the 2030 targets complementing with the SDGs originate from?
Well, in part, they are new and they have been, well, invented sounds a bit colloquial. I don't mean it like that, but they have been designed to be consistent with other initiatives that we're planning. I'm thinking of the one on the reduction of plastics, for which we have a piece of legislation as it is, and we are undertaking other actions in that area, international and at European level. And others are repeating what has been stated as an objective in, for instance, in farm to fork. So it's a mixture of both. Some of them are new, but at the level that we think is consistent with either existing policies or policies that we have in the pipeline, and others are repeating, confirming, if you like, the targets that we have set as part of farm to fork, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much for answering our questions. If there are any questions for our speakers, please ask them to the control panel. Then we can now go on to our next speaker, Gert Everhard from VLIZ.
I hope this works. Yeah.
Yes, we can see your screen on full screen.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Gert Everhard of the Flanders Marine Institute, and today I present to you this presentation entitled Marine Litter in Belgium from Knowledge Gaps to Collaborative Innovation. I also present on behalf of my colleague, who is Lisa de Vliez, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us. So the first part of my title is about the knowledge gaps, and in VLIZ we have the Department of Valorization and Innovation, and these write annual updates. These are policy informing briefs where on a certain topic we inform policymakers about the state of the art of the scientific progress. And also for microplastics and plastics in general, we present such an annual update on the research landscape and scientific knowledge of marine litter. And very interesting in this document is that we have at the very end an overview of the knowledge gaps and the research needs in Belgium. And the aim is then to inform policy and also to set priorities on how the research should evolve. And this document is also reviewed by a lot of experts in Belgium. And based on these knowledge gaps, we have put them in this conceptual scheme that we identify the research priorities. these. And we've put them in several clusters, and this conceptual scheme, as you will see in the end, is quite kind of a circular reasoning. So in terms of plastic and plastic pollution, one of the first things that we miss currently as insight is where the plastic comes from, and what are the sources, what are the discharges into the system, and then once we know they are there, how will we sample them, how will we quantify them, and how will we identify them. So this cluster really goes into the lack of protocols, and if there are protocols available, we also lack harmonization, not only different knowledge institutes, but also just at the European or even a global level. Then a second cluster of knowledge gaps that we identified is more on the mapping and the dynamics of the plastic. So we do not know currently how the plastics behave in the water column. We do not know what is their flux towards the North Sea. We do not know what are hotspots of pollution. We also do not know how it breaks down into smaller plastic particles, for example. If we then see on the right, there is not a lot of knowledge yet about the effects of plastics, both on the environment and on human health. The ecosystem risks are just at a very early stage that these have been assessed, and also about the trophic transfer of plastics towards higher trophic levels. There's not a lot of knowledge. Of course, all these components are very important to be tackled and to be answered in order to be able to take informed decisions by policymakers and by other stakeholders. So these can be used to not only define regulations and measures, but also in the end to then evaluate these measures. Now, luckily, it is the case that the field of plastic research really evolves quickly, so that also allows us to go quite fast and try to answer at least parts of this big puzzle. Now in VLIZ we have a research team that works on plastic, and you see them depicted here. This is a very young team, so we were established like 2 to 3 years ago, but that's also one of the advantages, since based on the knowledge gaps that we had, we could really target the right questions that are there to try to answer these important knowledge gaps. So it's a very dynamic team, a very international team, and also there are people with different educational backgrounds. So we do not only work with marine biologists or aquatic biologists, but also with engineers, with the psychologists, and with the economists. So it's really a cross-fertilization effect that we have there. So we have multiple projects running, and these are then forthcoming and entered on the knowledge gaps mentioned. I won't go over all these projects, but I just selected a few for you, which I believe are most interesting. And one of the first projects is the Andromeda project, which is a GPI Oceans funded project. And there we really target this first cluster of knowledge gaps, where we have the lack of protocols. So within Andromeda, we really aim to develop a new automated and cost-effective way to detect and identify and quantify microplastics in the ocean. So here we base ourselves on existing fluorometric methods that we try to combine with micro-FTR to be able to obtain polymer-specific information. But also, next to these fluorometric methods, we assess the possibility to also use our FlowCam at the VLIZ or our flow cytometer. So these are state-of-the-art infrastructures that we have available at the Flanders Marine Institute, and these allow us then to do image recognition and apply an artificial intelligence or machine learning approach. As you can see, all the projects are in collaboration with different institutes. So for example, this one here depicted in the pictures on the bottom, this one is in collaboration with Ghent University and with ILVO in Flanders, plus 15 other European institutes. A second very important project is the Pluxin project. So that project is subdivided in different aims, and one of the aims again is to try to develop a protocol. And here we do not use the classical way of collecting data with towing a net, for example, or with taking actual samples, but here we check how remote sensing techniques can be used to detect the microplastic. So we will check to what extent that classical RGB cameras that are often available in harbors just for port security reasons are able to capture microplastic pollution, but also apart from these RGB cameras, we also go into more advanced techniques, like for example hyperspectral measurements, and how these spectra that come out of the plastics are influenced by, for example, a water layer, sediment, biofouling, etc. The second aim of the PLUXing project is to develop a plastic transport model for the Belgian or the Flemish situation, and our aim is to have a 3D insight in the whereabouts of the plastic. So we really want to know where the plastic is at which moment, and we want to know which fraction of the plastic floats, which fraction of the plastic sinks, which fraction of the plastic will beach. And of course, for this we have observations that are needed, really a lot, to be able to calibrate the model that will be used for that. And then there's a lot of model development needed in the open source software TILBA, together again with all these partners that you see here at the bottom. So Ghent University, Antwerp University, KU Leuven, Vito, plus then 13 other companies. I will show that in a minute. Then related to the PLUXing project, there's the plastic T0 flux measurement. So there the aim is again that we take in the conventional way micro and macroplastic samples to be able to quantify the flux of litter via rivers and canals towards the ocean. And there we see this as a baseline measurement to be able to evaluate in the end the aims that are set in the Flemish action plan for marine litter. So there by 2025, the aim is to reduce the flow of litter towards the ocean by 75%. And here in this project, we then set the baseline. That's a kind of a reference situation. And then in the end, in 2025, we will be able to evaluate whether the measures taken by our policymakers and stakeholders have been effective or not. And then something totally different, but I also wanted to add it in this presentation, is a project that we have on blue health and blue psychology. So as I've said, we are a very interdisciplinary team. So here in this project, we investigate how coastal environments benefit our well-being, mental well-being, psychological well-being. For example, if you go to the beach, you feel that your stress is reduced and you get more meaning in life. And we try to assess here how plastic and beach litter can alter these often very positive aspects of being at the coast, how this can be altered in a negative way due to changes in perceptions, feelings, and emotions. So this is also a very novel field, and there we are one of the pioneers in Belgium and even in Europe to perform this kind of research. So that was just a very brief overview of a few of the projects that we have currently running. Second part of my title was about a collaborative innovation, and there I will go back to my colleagues of the Department of Valorization and Innovation. These people are in really close contact with industry and policymakers, and also, as shown here on the slide, with the people of the Blue Cluster. So the Flanders Marine Institute was one of the driving forces, together with other actors, to initiate this cluster, and this cluster has now been established since 2018, and the aim of this Flemish Spearhead Cluster is to develop and to promote economic activities linked to the sea. So this cluster has currently over 200 cluster members, and this is composed of companies, large companies, but also small companies, and then knowledge institutes and other stakeholders. And they work, the cluster works along different thematic themes. And for each of these themes, they have developed a roadmap. And one of these themes is ocean health and waste solutions. And I think that's well matching with the zero pollution initiative taken in this week. And it is based on this roadmap and based on that thematic theme that the companies that are inside the cluster, they really said, look, we need some basic knowledge about where the plastic is, how we can detect the plastic. And are the companies themselves that asked towards the knowledge institutes, hey, look guys, could you try to perform or to give us this information? So it are research questions that are coming from the companies. These are put in front of the knowledge institutes, and it is then the knowledge institutes that try to answer the question. So it's not really fundamental research, it's really research with the aim of further innovation in a very collaborative way. So that's why in the Vliz project, that's why we have in the steering committee these companies. These play a very central role, and in fact, they also steer the project into certain directions. So it are them that really guide the knowledge institutes towards questions that they want to see answered. So that's the inner circle of Vliz, but then there's also an outer circle of Vliz where there are other advisory boards. In these advisory boards, we have scientific advisory boards. There we have national and international experts that assess to what extent we are working according to the state of the art, and that we try to advance this state of the art. But also we have our strategic advisory board, and in this strategic advisory board there are then these policy makers, there are NGOs, there are other stakeholder organizations. So it are really, we play here at 4 different levels, so to speak. So we have the steering committee with companies and the knowledge institutes. We have then the strategic advisory board. We have our scientific advisory board. And then we have also these very close contacts with the Blue Cluster. So we work there at different levels. Now, how does it then work? This in the identification of the research priorities and the design of the research. So there we have a lot of consultations with these different stakeholders. So we have meetings, we have polls, we have interviews, and based on these we then identify fields of interests, obstacles, needs, and wishes. And from these talks, we then compile all this information. We then select an umbrella team, is what we call this. So this is a team where we feel there's a common support. And one of these teams that we recently tackled was on plastic removal and collection technologies, because there were quite some companies inside Vliz that had questions about which removal technologies that are currently commercially available are most relevant for their conditions. And that's why, and that's then one of the cases we worked on. So it was a key topic, and then together with the colleagues of valorization and innovation department, we then also see the potential to compile all this information in a policy information brief. We can then spread this information again for other partners, because it's in our opinion a usable knowledge base here then as an overview of plastic capture. So this was based on a specific question we received from several ports, and currently we have a case study running in the port of Ghent, so North Sea port, to see which of the commercially available systems are most suitable for their conditions. So I hope that in this very brief presentation, I have been able to convince you that in VLIZ we really work along this quadruple helix. So we have the different components integrated in our strategy. So we have the policy, industry, science, and society. So for policy, we try to transfer the knowledge, and we try to also come up with proposals for solutions and measures, and we are there represented in different administrative levels. So that goes from the very local level of the city of Ostend towards the level of the province, towards the level of Flanders, and then higher up in Europe. We really work a lot together with industry people. I've shown you the example of the Pluxem project and of the Blue Cluster, but also we work together with other spearhead cluster organizations, like, for example, Catalysti. I've shown you some of the scientific projects, research and innovation project that we have currently running, but we're also at the forefront of drafting strategic research agendas. So these research agendas, we draft them, of course, together with other people, and also we give comments to these documents. And then finally, we have also the society that is represented. So there also we do the knowledge transfer, and we have quite some citizen science projects running, but unfortunately today I could not go into detail about that. So VLIZ is really a knowledge broker for marine expertise, and we really try to collaborate with the different actors represented here in this slide. So policy, industry, science, and society. And then based on all this knowledge that we gather, we try to valorize this into new innovation actions. So thanks a lot. Here again, the team that works together with me, and I hope to visit. I hope to see you once in the city of Ostend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Everaert, for your very interesting presentation. We will handle all questions from the three bridges later on. So we can now go on to our next speaker, Mr. Bernard de Potter from VMM.
Do you hear me or see me?
We can already hear you, but we can't see you. Yes, we can now see you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor to also reflect on the EU action plan, what's in for water policy. Yeah, I've read the action plan through and just some general remarks. I think it's a very interesting document. I think the European level is the right level to tackle this problem since it's attached to product policy, and yeah, the value chains economically are really cross-boundary. So you cannot tackle this problem only on a national, regional level. I think Europe is really at stake for really regulating the economic unified market. What's also interesting on the document, it's an integrated approach. It's not only looking at air, water, or soil, but looking from an integrated perspective. And indeed, the importance of soil is also elaborated in the document. Since we are talking on water, I will not go in that detail, but I just want to stress this. What is also, I think, interesting is that there are flagships, concrete actions to do something on this issue. What I, on the other side, found a bit disappointing, I found nothing disruptive. I see a lot of interesting initiatives which are already there or which are in plan, but I'm not convinced that we have found, I would say, a breakthrough solutions that really make a real difference in the future. Sorry for that, but maybe I didn't read the document fully and integrated and in depth. But for example, and reversing the pyramid and saying that the precautionary principle should be the first one, in my textbooks of already 20 years, it was first prevention, then protection, and then, of course, end of pipe measures. So I don't see the reverse there on this, but maybe the speaker from the Commission can enlighten what really is the disruptive of this document. The next slide, we have emerged, I think, here the main target and the links with what is mentioned, the revised drinking water directive, where there is attention for more stringent water quality standards, tackling pollutants of concern, and so on. There is also a link to the bathing water directive and also to the urban wastewater treatment directive. The drinking water directive is already in place, so it's now the traduction into national and regional regulations. The VMM, the Flanders Environmental Agency, is in the lead of this process, and everybody, of course, we are in now concern and talk with Aqua Flanders and the drinking water companies, but of course all the other stakeholders who want to be involved in the process to implement this traduction of the revised drinking water directive are of course welcome to contact the VMM to be involved in that process. The two other ones, the Commission will assess by 23 whether new parameters also need to address in the ongoing review of the bathing water directive. And there is also the review of the urban wastewater treatment directive. There, of course, there are the procedures which are at the moment running. There are the, of course, more formal procedures where we go with the official delegates towards the European Commission. And of course, due to these processes, we mainly also organize stakeholder events to see what are the opinions of the different stakeholders in Flanders and to implement them in these revision processes. So these are running processes, and you are welcome to contact VMM to be part of it. Next slide, we see that the document is proposing to, a lot of measures needs, of course, financement, and there is the reference to the multiple annual financial framework and also the recovery and resilience facility. I think this is, of course, very important instruments, but certainly for the recovery and resilience plans, Belgium has already proposed, Flanders also. There is the Blue Deal. It will be very difficult to enter new topics, for example, in the new Blue Deal at this moment. The most important point is at this moment is what is mentioned in the Blue Deal, which is mainly attached to problems on water quantity to execute all the measurements and activities and projects that are mentioned in the Blue Deal. So there is, in practice, less room to implement the initiatives which are due or necessary to execute the zero pollution plan, to implement them. There is more room still in the cohesion action plans. However, I'm not aware of the latest developments on how the use of the ERDF funds, for example, in Flanders, and which room there is in reality to implement, for example, measurements of the zero pollution plan in these frameworks. A very important point will also be the sustainable finance taxonomy. Yes, what is, I would say, has a green label to invest in, what is avoided to be invested in the future. I think the financial world is a very important partner to implement a lot of actions on greening, on environmental concern. So we are looking forward also to this implementation. As already said, the action plan, that's the next slide, mention a lot of flagships. Yeah, the time is short, so I cannot go into detail towards all these flagships. I just mention some of them. For example, flagship 3 mentions that the Commission will present a scoreboard of EU regions' green performance with also the link to the Regio Stars initiative. I think it's an open question to all of you here in the forum from Flanders. If we think this is a very important label to have as Flanders, then we have to collaborate together and to make forward a good project to have this maybe award for the Green Region of the Year. I think we do a lot of things in Flanders. We can certainly demonstrate a lot of, and we have already seen some of these examples, and like, for example, the Blue Cluster or the activities of Vlakwa. There is a lot of to mention, but open question, if we want to achieve this, that means a collaboration with many partners in the region. On the flagship 4, facilitating zero pollution choices will encourage public and private sector operators to make zero pollution pledges to promote best available near zero waste options. There, I think, is mentioned for example, polluter pays principle. Just an open idea. We have at this moment the tax on value added in the value chain. What does really mean value added is also bringing into context environmental damages. So value this value also a possibility to bring in this kind of frameworks. And indeed, this must be discussed on a European level to see if it is possible to bringing green elements and also zero pollution prevention in, for example, this kind of financial systems. On flagship 5, and the enforcing zero pollution together, the compliance issue. I see there and that there will be set up fora to exchange of good practices. I only remark in practice that it is very difficult to do something on the problem. I just mentioned, for example, and the Terios incident last year, where a lot of nutrients from a company in the north of France were put in the Scheldt. What this really means and compliance into practice. So the collaboration, cross-border, how we can go to justice, how importance will take justice on this kind of progress. And after years, maybe there will be some condemnation. We will see. So I really mention a lot of good ideas here in the text, but there is the way to put this really into practice. I think there is still more than set up platforms to have best exchange of best practices. There is also flagship 7, living labs for greener digital solutions and smart zero pollution. I think no one can deny that digitalization is a very important mainstreaming in our society, and of course also in monitoring pollution, but also monitoring production processes and so on. So digitalization, artificial intelligence, and so on will have a great help to have better insights. Also in what Dirk Halet mentions in the causal root diagrams, and to have all the data available to really have insights on a quantitative matter on the schemes. Digitalization will be very important for that. On the other hand, we all know how many rare elements there are in our smartphones, and that also the enhancement of the digitalization also has a green ecological footprint, certainly also on pollutants. So all this, what is happening with all this e-waste? What is happening with all this e-waste when this is coming also into the water system? I think a lot of issues are also there. So there's not only the positive aspect of digitalization, there is also, I think, on the pollutants and the e-waste also a point of concern about this. So some reflections on the flagships. Due to time constraints, I cannot go more into detail. The next slide, go further into detail what is happening in Flanders region about that. And concerning the water policy. So first of all, there is of course the water policy note. I suppose you all are aware of this. If not, I fully recommend to read the water policy note. And there, of course, there is also attention on the reduction of pressure from pollutants. I will not go further into detail. Just a recommendation to have a good look at it. And then, of course, this vision has to be implemented in the river-based management plans. I know the most of you are aware and that we are now fully working, that's the next slide, on the river management plans for the period 2020-2027. And you see here that there are, of course, there are not only in the vision, there are the actions, but there are also the measurements. And there are some types of managements in the group 7, which are really dedicated also to prevent the further spreading out of pollutants, of contaminants in our water system. I just remark that we have a very good insight in the parameters, for example, nitrogen, phosphate, but we have a very less insight in, for example, in the chemical hazardous substances in our river systems. We have monitoring reports about that, but the quantity flows, the attribution to the different polluter groups, and so on, it's much less information than, for example, on the more classical parameters. And he referred to that and to all the problematic also, what's really hazardous, for example, and with the classical parameters, you can work with norms. And for example, maximum X milligram per liter can be come into the river flow. That's much more difficult when you talk about chemical substances and also groups of these substances and sources. So you need different approaches to that. We are working on that, on how to bring into scope ecotoxicology, but also this is still a very long way to go to really have this topic on the same, I would say, measurement than the more classical parameters. So we are very working hard. The 3rd of June, the Coordination Commission on Integral Water Policy will take stock of the Flanders, of the river-based management plans. And in the second half of the year, there will be the political process to really have a decision, and the river-based management plan must be submitted to the European Commission by the end of this year. We have already seen the vision. We have now the plan. Of course, most important are the instruments and the action. And so on the next slide, I give you a flavor of what kind of actions are being put in place at this moment. You see that the legislative instruments, you have the policy development and advice on the permits of different actors. There are the tariffs and levies also, and we try to implement the polluter pays principle. There are the best available techniques and the reference documents, and to also have a scientific background and to put forward conditions into the environmental permits. And there is also the sustainable use of non-use of pesticides by local authorities, where we have also seen that we made a very great progress in not using pesticides anymore by local authorities. That's more some of legislative instruments. We're also working with voluntary instruments. For example, I give here the example of the preparation of a Green Deal on healthcare. At this moment, you know, when there is a pharmaceutical brought into the market, there is a whole life cycle that there must be transmitted. And you have the first phase, and then at the end, you have clinical trials. But this is very or mostly oriented towards human health. There is very less attention to what's happening with all this pharma and sources in the wider spreading of these components and these contaminants. Firstly, of course, due to the sewage system into the water system, and then further on also in the broader environment. And I think it's important and to have to talk about this. And therefore, there is set up the process of coming to a Green Deal together with all the partners involved in the healthcare sector. The next slide give some illustration then of concrete projects. So we have the vision, we have the plan, we have the instruments. Of course, we are also doing projects. That is the microplastics project. There's done a research project under coordination of Professor Colin Janssens of the University of Ghent on the distributions and effects and risk of micro and nanoplastics in wastewater and surface water. We attend that the results of the study will be published within some weeks. So keep in mind the newsletter of VMM to see the results of this study. And then another project is the wastewater tracing algorithm as a digital solution, which is also an Interreg Northwest program. Be good, look to the website of this project to see what's really going on there. That was some of what is happening in Flanders. Then some remark to finish. I've put a shirt towards the document, and I found, of course, there are links with the zero pollution strategy and other strategies. For example, the pharmaceutical industry or the strategy for the chemicals. However, I think there could be a much more link on REACH on the monitoring issue. There is also mentioned that there will be some tasks for the European Environmental Agency. As you know, that we as VMM are very working closely together with the European Environmental Agency and the other environmental agencies in Europe on developing new methods of monitoring. So we are expecting a lot of them because the monitoring the integrated monitoring is still a very a challenging issue. And we see that, for example, in programs like Horizon Europe and so on, mostly it's very difficult to bring in projects to develop adequate monitoring, adequate novel monitoring techniques. So we hope that the zero pollution strategy opens up some of the financing mechanisms for research and innovation to really also can more with the colleagues of the environmental agency and the other colleagues in Europe to put forward integrated monitoring techniques, which is necessary to really implement the zero pollution strategy. What I found also not less attention, I see a lot of attention to chemicals. I see much more less attention to biological processes. We know all that also there, and for example, GGOs, mutants, and so on, due to biological processes can also harm human health and environmental damage. And I had expected that there would also be a chapter on this issue into the zero pollution action plan. And then a last point, it's already mentioned by the Blue Cluster. We have seen the Pluxin project. I think it's a very good example also of the setup. We have seen and that there not only are involved in the companies, but also the research institutes, also the stakeholders, for example, the policymakers like VMM. But I think a Pluxin project is a rare example of this. If we see in the European innovation trajectories, I think that is not a structural component to really bring in, for example, organizations like VMM to really watch out what could be of the innovation, I would say collateral damage, what could be nocive to the human health and the environment. And I think it's important to implement also in this innovation process this structural component that environmental agencies can have a look on it, because we have to combine two principles. Of course, innovation is necessary and it's very important also for the well-being of our society. But on the other hand, we have the precautionary principle, and we cannot experiment without taking into concern also the reflection and the reaction on human health, and more important for VMM also onto the ecosystem, especially the water system. So far, some remarks. So a very interesting document since it integrates the issue, the topic, but still I think some more challenges to really make a difference on the floor. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Potter, for your very interesting presentations. We can now go on to some questions. The first question is for Dirk Halle from Vlakwa. What do you mean by stakeholders? Are local governments also interesting partners?
What I meant with stakeholders, if you look to, well, maybe if you want to take proper decisions, and we take decisions not based on reality, but based on our perception of a reality. So the better that we get our perception, the better decisions we can make. So it's very important that you have different stakeholders, or maybe a better word is actors around the table from different disciplines, from different players from society, to look to the challenges. And so within the arena tract, we really looked to have these different disciplines around the table, from CEOs from companies, from the financial sector, but also what's very important, as Bernard De Potter explained, to have really disruptive ideas, to also have pioneers, new entrants involved in this arena process, to think of new ideas. But then, of course, in the next step, next to having nice ideas, you also need action to see what is actually then needed at level of governance, business models, innovation, knowledge, etc. And there, of course, it's very important to work together with different stakeholders, and then the involvement of local actors is, for example, very valuable. And one of the mental models, which I didn't mention, was that we see that demand always follows, supply always follows demand. So if the demand for drinking water increases, we will do all in effort to ensure that we can supply all this water. And the question was, what if we turn this around and, for example, we only use drinking water for drinking? And to implement this design criterion in, for example, building projects, then we look to building promoters, local authorities, to see where we could develop such a case. So it's stakeholders is rather broad in the field of developing new ideas, but also very much important in setting up, making the translation from ideas to practice.
Okay, thank you very much for answering this question. I have a question for Gert Everaert from VLIZ. Does the VLIZ team also consider microplastics pollution in fish food products?
In fish food products, not yet. So we mainly focus ourselves on environmental matrices, like there is the water phase, so the floating, so the surface water, the water column, and the sediment. Inside biota and related to that in fish food, for example, no, that's not our core team. But I'm sure that some of the knowledge institutes that were also depicted as partners of the project that we have, these people have these expertise and can help out.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Bernard de Potter from VMM. What is your view on legacy pollutants that make recycling difficult because current standards are very strict, prohibited for them?
I would just want to ask to the person who has put forward the question and to have some more insight, because it's for me a real abstract question. So I will try to interpret the question. Yeah, it's of course important that in future, due to, and then we come to another, I think, strategy and the circular action plan, that in future products are designed more in a modular way, so that if they come in the end of life phase, that it can of course be reused, but if this is not possible, first of all for the same function, if not for another function, but if there is no reuse more, that the modular components can be decomposed so that there is no pollution anymore. I think this is really a striving point. And of course, we are working also in the context of Vlaanderen Circulair, and you know that there is a whole platform which is elaborated by Minister Krivits and Minister De Meer, where there are also 5 teams on it. 4 of the teams are more on material life cycles, but there is also a working platform on water reuse, and also, of course, the components in water. There is already now a reuse of phosphor, but of course we have also to look at the reuse of other components. So the platform has put forward a working agenda, but everyone who is interested also in working together within this working platform within Vlaanderen Circulair Team Water is welcome to rejoin and to tackle this kind of questions.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question for you, Mr. De Potter. The question is, which disruptive ideas or potential breakthrough solutions would you or VMM like to propose, which you did not find in the Commission documents?
It's of course the $1 million question. What kind of breakthroughs could be? yeah, I think that that we must have look into, for example, some issues that we have solved. For example, if we look to the CFKs, we all know that this hazardous standards substances were in our refrigerators, and there is a global ban on it, and nobody now is still using this kind of matter anymore. So there are already, I think, we have already solved some of these problems, and I think we have to take lessons out of these good practices and try to implement this also on new kind of problems. But I think, and my message was, by only setting up platforms of exchange of good practices, that will not be enough. I think there will be also more innovation in the way of tackling on more policy, how we tackle this kind of policy issues. And I refer there to the presentation of Dirk Galet, which sees some of the problems also in a more systemic manner, so that we don't only cure where it aches, but that we look to the really drivers of the pollution. And there I think also will be important behavior change. If I go with my bike into the roads of Flanders, I see a lot of litter still along the road. So that means that we have a responsibility, all of us, and there is a need of behavioral change, not only, of course, in industrial design of industrial processes and the design of products, but also in the habits of the consumers. And this makes, I think, that also the the issues of nudging, behavioral insights, and so on, could be at least complementary instruments than these that are mentioned in the zero pollution action plan so far.
Okay, thank you very much for answering all our questions. Then there's nothing left for me to do but thank everyone who cooperated in this webinar. I would like to thank all our speakers for their interesting presentations. All presentations and the full recording of this webinar will be available on our website. We would appreciate it if you could fill out our poll as you leave this webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning, and hopefully until next time.